This second project we're going to be doing is one I like to call Dice, Donuts, and Root Beer. You should be able to guess what we'll be modeling by those names. We're going to be starting off with two six-sided die. In this particular video, we're going to be modeling a six-sided die using geometry to determine how many pips are on each side. So to begin this, we're going to go to our Create Object tab, and we're going to move over to Extended Primitives, and we're going to select Chamfer Box. Once we have that, we're just going to add one to the scene. Don't worry about the dimensions just yet. Just go ahead and click and drag to do the base. Move up to set a height. Click, and then when you click a second time, that'll set the fillet, which is the rounded edge here. So we're going with a chamfer box instead of a standard box, simply because a standard box always has these sharp edges here. While if you ever take a look at die that you get from Monopoly or any other type of board game, you'll see the edges are rounded off. That makes it easier for the die to roll along the table. So again, we've got our starting box here. And for the length, width, and height, we're going to set all of those to 10. Die are pretty simple to figure out as far as the dimensions go, simply because they're cube, and there's rules for where the pips go. So if we set the length, width, and height at 10, then the fillet, I like the 0.4. However, if you want to go for a slightly different fillet, feel free. Remember, the higher you increase it, the more rounded your die becomes. Increase it too high, and you accidentally create a sphere. So again, I'm sticking with 0.4. Length segments, width segments, and height segments are all going to be 1. And fillet segments, I'm just going to leave a 3. There's not really that strong of a curvature going on these corners, so leaving it at 3 shouldn't be noticeable really to anybody. After that, I want to select my move tool and move this to 0, 0, 0. So if I type 0 on the x-axis there, 0 on the y, and 0 on the z, that sets it to the 0, 0, 0 point. As a general rule, you should always do that when you're modeling a new object. It'll make life a little bit easier on you if you have to do precise coordinates and you have to have it match opposing sides. Additionally, if you go into game design, that 0, 0, 0 point tends to be your pivot point for the object. So when you import it into your game engine, that's going to be the point where the object is spawned in. So by setting a 0, 0, 0, the box was drawn from the top view here. This sets the pivot point down here. And when it drops into the game, it'll be flat side on the ground. All right. Next step, we want to go ahead and add some spheres to this object, to the scene. So I'm going to click on Create. I want to make sure I'm back on Standard Primitives. And we have two sphere options, so Sphere and Geosphere. I'm just going to draw a sphere over here real quick, and then a geosphere right here. Again, it's just click and drag, and as soon as you release, that sets the height. The radius. So now, as you can see, visually, there's not much different when they're shaded, but if I click on this viewport over here, you can see that the regular sphere has straight lines going across and is basically just made up of a whole bunch of square-like shapes. This is a lot like you'd see on a globe where you have your longitude and latitude lines. The geosphere, on the other hand, is made up of a whole bunch of triangles. Well, you can change the shape type. Well, they're still triangles anyways. They're made up of a whole bunch of triangles. They try to maintain a consistent size on the shape generation. If I rotate around, I really don't see any difference in the size, so I'm going to assume they are successful. A lot of blabbering on my part there. Between the two shapes, I'm going to go with the geosphere simply because we have a more uniform disbursement of the shapes around the sphere. Whereas on this one, if I use this portion of the sphere over here in order to cut out the pip, we're going to have a different pattern than if we use this portion on the top part. So just to make sure the pattern's relatively the same, the geosphere is what I'm going with. So we're going to hit the delete button on the keyboard to kill the regular sphere. Then I'm going to select my geosphere and change my radius down to 1. And it's all the way off to the side, but that's okay. We're going to move it in place. And again, with the dice, as far as the placement of each of the pips, we can use a little bit of math to figure out where they're supposed to be, so we won't have to manually move anything. So let's go ahead and start with the very top here. So move tool still selected. I'm going to change my X to 0 and my Y to 0. That's going to move it right to the middle of my scene right here. Now the Z I'm going to move to 10.25. And what that's going to do is it's going to take it to the top of the box, and it's not going to be the full half of the sphere going into the box to carve out the pip. It's just going to be this portion right here. So then let's go ahead and right click on that and then clone it. I'm going to go with copy. Again, the difference between copy and instance is if you do instance, any changes you make to one will happen to all of them. So I've made my copy. I'm going to change my X to 2.5 and my Y to 2.5. Oops. And that moves it up over to that corner right there. So let's clone it again. And I'm just going to change my X to negative 2.5. And there we have 3 of the 5 pips. So now pay attention to the gizmo here. Now you notice these lines, they represent the axes, the y-axis, x-axis, z-axis. These arrows at the end of them tell you which way the positive values are. So even though we're in the negative right here, this arrow here is telling us that if we go this way on the x-axis, it's going to become positive. Whoops. Had the wrong viewport selected. That's why my numbers weren't making sense to me. X this way is positive. Y this way is positive. Z is this way positive. Depending what viewport you have selected, you may see that the X, Y, and Z flips to a different perspective. And that's just 100% what viewport you have selected. So X and Y, X and Y, X and Y. So depending what viewport you have selected, if it's one of the orthographics that are front, top, left, right, back, so any of these right along through here, no matter what view it is, to the right and left is going to be your x-axis, your horizontal axis, and up and down is going to be your y-axis, also known as your vertical axis. Only in perspective over here will you have a set direction for your x, y, and z. All right. So he's going to hold down Control, right click, and then clone on this. I'm going to click copy. So I've just made a copy of both of these pips at the same time, or spheres. And y is going this direction, but I want them down on this side, so I know I need to do negative 2.5 here. And that sets all 5 pips there. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, there's a rule for what number is on which side of the die. So if I have a 5 on top of the die, I'm going to need a 2 on the bottom of the die. The reason for that is that regardless of what number is showing, up at the top, if you add the top with the bottom, it's always going to equal 7. So if the top were a 3 instead, we'd have to have the bottom of a 4. So let's go ahead and duplicate these. We'll clone them. And I'm going to set the z-axis to negative 0.25. And that moves them nicely to the bottom there. So 5 plus 2 is 7. Let's go ahead and start the next side. Just select any one of these pips, right-click, clone, copy. And let's go with 5.25 on the X. And let's go with 5 for the Y. Not 5. 0. 5 for the Z. And that's going to move that pip right to the middle of this plane right here. So if I were to just go with 1 on this side, I would need to do a 6 for the other side. So let's go ahead and do the 6. We'll clone that, we'll make a copy, and we'll change the x to negative 5.25, because you see x is pointing away from the box here. So that means it's the x-axis that we're going to have to go through in order to get to this side. So negative 5.25, pips right there. Now we're going to leave the z alone, but we're going to change the y to 2. I'm going to right-click on it, I'm going to clone it, make a copy, and then change the y to negative 2. So now we have 2 pips on this side so far. Holding down Control, clicking the second one, right-click, clone, and copy. And we're going to change our z to 7.5. So there it is up there. Right-click again, clone, and we're going to change the z to 2.5. So there we have the 6 there, the 1 there, adds up to 7. So we just have these 2 sides left to add the spheres to. And I know it looks weird with these spheres just kind of bulging out of the box, but we're just going to be using these spheres as references for our boolean operation to just carve the pips out of it. So don't worry too much about that. Also, if you were to be doing this for game design, these spheres are way more complicated than they need to be. You would want to drop down these segments to a lower number, so that way you can reduce the number of polygons being used in the carving process. We're not going to worry about that today though, because this is just for rendering and videos. So if we right click on that and then click clone, we're going to let it make a copy. Now our numbers that are left are 4 and 3, so let's move our x to 2.5, our y to 5.25, and our z to 7.5. That should throw us right in the corner. Yep. So then on the side with 4 pips, we'll want 1 in each corner. So we right click, click clone, OK. And we're going to change our x-axis to negative 2.5. So now we have 2 on the top. Hold down Control, right click, clone. And then we're going to move our z-axis to 2.5. So then there's our 4. So 4 plus 3 is 7, so 3 is the next number we need to do. So hold Control, and we're going to grab the 2 corner pieces that are across from each other like that. I'm going to right-click on them and clone them. And the reason why we're grabbing 2 is because a 3 is basically a slash right across the die. So these 2 pips are more or less in the right location. They're just on the wrong side of the dice. So we're going to drop this over to y being negative 5.25. That pulls it over to the other side of the die. And then we just have 1 more pip to place. So right click on it, clone, copy. And for this one, we're going to want our x at 0 and our z at 5. Because again, our box is 10 by 10 by 10, which means halfway up is a 5. So there we go. All of our pips are in place on our box. The next step is going to be to use our boolean operator in order to cut everything out. So if we select on the chamfer box, we're going to go over to New Objects and to Compound Objects. Now, as a general rule, you should go ahead and save your scene before you add a boolean operator or compound object. The reason for that being, what it's going to do is it's basically going to destroy the mesh that you currently have selected while using all the other ones you select as references. Not really such a big deal because you have the undo function right here. Click that, or you hit Control-Z on the keyboard. Either way, it'll undo each and every single step all the way up to a certain point. The issue comes with it only has so far back it can go. So you want to go ahead and save just so you have a save point in case you mess something up. I happen to know for this particular one I really don't need to save, but it does bear repeating. Save before you do something that might mess stuff up. So I'm going to click this, I'm going to click Add Operands, I'm going to scroll down here and select Subtract. And then from there, I can either select each one of the spheres from over here, from the viewport, or I could come over here to the hierarchy layers or Scene Explorer and click on them from there. It really is just a matter of preference which way you want to do it. Personally, I usually prefer to do it from the viewport, even though it is a little bit slower. There we go. All the pips are now carved out of the die. So we're going to deselect Add Operands, and now it's time to save. Now, before we move on to the next part of the project, I do want to just go ahead and render this out real quick so you can see what it looks like. Again, teapot with the lightning bolt will just quickly render everything out for you. And there we go. Again, keep in mind we haven't added any materials yet and we haven't set up the scenery yet. So this is all very basic, but we'll do more of that in a bit.